I was young, naive, but loving her made me grow up faster than I ever imagined. The first time I saw her, I wasn't prepared. It wasn't a cinematic moment. No sudden rain, no grand entrance. It was just an ordinary day, and yet the moment she walked into the café, the air shifted. I was 24, still fumbling through my early 20s with more curiosity than confidence. And there she was, poised, graceful, and unapologetically present. A woman in her early 40s who seemed to carry her life lightly on her shoulders, yet with a quiet weight that hinted at depth. She was ordering her coffee, and something about the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear made the world blur for a second. Her laughter wasn't loud, but it had a resonance that made the hum of the cafe fade away. I caught myself staring, feeling that strange mix of admiration and unease, the kind you feel when someone makes you aware of your own inexperience without a single word. She turned briefly, her eyes meeting mine, calm, curious, and just a little amused, like she could see the thoughts I hadn't yet admitted to myself. I smiled awkwardly, realizing too late that my hands were shaking slightly. The conversation that followed was brief. A polite exchange over the cafe counter, a question about the menu, a shared joke that made her lips curve just enough to make my chest tighten. But even in that fleeting interaction, something sparked. It wasn't just attraction, it was recognition. She carried herself in a way that made me want to be steadier, more thoughtful, more present. Every glance, every small movement seemed intentional, though she probably didn't even realize the effect she had. As she gathered her things and started to leave, our hands brushed for the briefest instant. The touch wasn't electric or dramatic, but it sent warmth spiraling up my arm, a quiet pulse of something I couldn't name. I wanted to hold onto it, to freeze that moment in time. The cafe noise returned, the baristas called out orders, and the normalcy of the world rushed back. But I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would be quite the same again. What struck me most was how effortlessly she made space for me in her world. I wasn't just a young man in the room. I was someone she acknowledged, someone she looked at directly. Her presence demanded respect, and yet invited connection. I realized in that instant that I had never met anyone like her. A woman who could be commanding without being overbearing, confident without being arrogant, and warm without losing her mystery. Walking home that day, I replayed the encounter over and over. Her smile, the tilt of her head, the sound of her laughter. I knew, somewhere deep inside, that I had just stepped into a story that would demand more of me than I was ready for. Loving her, I sensed, would change everything. I wasn't just drawn to her beauty or her charm. I was captivated by the life she carried, the depth she revealed in the smallest gestures. And I knew, with a clarity that scared and excited me at the same time, that this was the beginning of something that would shape me in ways I couldn't yet understand. After that first encounter in the cafe, I couldn't stop thinking about her. There was something about the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence, the way she seemed to notice details most people overlooked, that made me want to be better, more aware, more present. And then, by some twist of fate, we were thrown together again. Not by chance this time, but necessity. She needed help with something practical, something that required hands and focus. A minor repair at her apartment, moving a few boxes for a friend, or helping her set up for an event she was organizing. At first, I felt the familiar twinge of self-consciousness. I was young. I wasn't fully sure of my place in the world yet. But the moment I saw her, standing there with her natural grace and that hint of a smile, I realized she was treating me differently. She wasn't seeing me as a kid tagging along. She was seeing me as capable, as someone who could rise to the task. And that recognition, subtle as it was, sparked something inside me. Pride, respect, and a budding desire to be worthy of her attention. Working beside her, I began to notice the little things. How her fingers moved deftly as she sorted through papers, the careful way she placed fragile items down, the thoughtful way she paused to consider a solution instead of rushing. She talked to me as if I were her equal, asking my opinion, listening when I offered ideas, and even chuckling at my half-serious suggestions. It wasn't flattery. It was genuine acknowledgement. And in return, I found myself paying attention more than I ever had before, to her expressions, the the tilt of her head when she was thinking, the way her eyes softened when she was amused. At one point, as I handed her a stack of papers, our fingers brushed lightly. The touch was brief, almost incidental, but I felt a jolt of warmth travel up my arm, something comforting and thrilling all at once. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand linger for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, and I knew she had felt it too. It was a small, intimate acknowledgement in a world that often demanded distance, and it made my chest tighten in the most unexpected way. By the end of our task, we were both laughing quietly at some shared mishap. A box that wouldn't close, a stubborn screw that refused to turn. I felt an ease around her I hadn't felt with anyone my age. And in that quiet companionship, I realized how deeply her presence affected me. She made me want to grow, to be steadier, more confident, not just to impress her, but because being around her made me want to rise to the standard she lived by every day. As she thanked me, her hand brushed against my forearm again. Warm, reassuring, and gently grounding. I wanted to linger in that moment, to memorize the sensation of her touch and the way her eyes met mine with quiet approval. Something was shifting between us, slowly, imperceptibly, but irrevocably. She was showing me that age didn't define capability, that respect could be mutual, and that closeness could exist without words. And for the first time, I felt the thrilling mix of excitement and nervousness that comes with truly connecting with someone who changes the way you see yourself. It was during one of those unexpectedly quiet afternoons that everything began to shift. I had thought our interactions would remain casual, brief encounters, helpful gestures, small smiles across a room. But somehow we found ourselves sitting together in her living room, the kind of space that felt lived in yet carefully curated, with soft light filtering through sheer curtains. The world outside hummed on, indifferent, but inside that room, time slowed. She started talking about herself in a way I hadn't seen before, hesitant, vulnerable, as if testing the waters. She spoke of disappointments she carried quietly, moments of loneliness she rarely admitted even to her closest friends, the kind of small regrets that accumulate like invisible weight over the years. Her voice trembled for a fraction of a second, a subtle quiver that I almost missed, but it made my chest tighten. She was showing me a side of herself that few ever saw, and the raw honesty of it made me both honored and terrified. I felt compelled to respond in kind. I shared pieces of my own life, fears, insecurities, moments when I had felt unmoored or uncertain. At first, my words sounded clumsy, too young, but she listened with that same quiet attentiveness that had drawn me to her from the beginning. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She simply absorbed my thoughts, nodding gently, offering a reassuring smile when I faltered. In her presence, I realized that I could be entirely myself without fear of rejection. The room seemed smaller with every word, closer, warmer. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her hand brushing the edge of the table, and I couldn't help but notice the subtle tension in her shoulders, a mixture of guardedness and tentative trust. I wanted to reach across, to steady her, to offer comfort, but I hesitated, unsure if such a gesture would be welcome. And then, she did something that took my breath away. When I mentioned a fleeting moment of self-doubt, she placed her hand lightly on mine. It was a soft, grounding touch, deliberate yet unassuming. My hand went still, and I felt a quiet shock run through me, a mixture of warmth, surprise, and a longing I hadn't yet fully acknowledged. That brief connection, her fingers resting on mine, became a silent conversation. No words were needed. Her touch spoke volumes. I realized in that instant how deeply she had begun to affect me, how much her presence unsettled me in the best possible way. Each time she let her guard down, I felt compelled to match her honesty, to mirror the trust she offered. I didn't want to disappoint her. I didn't want to retreat into my youthfulness, my inexperience. I wanted to rise to meet her, to be worthy of the space she was granting me in her life. When our conversation eventually drew to a close, I stood to leave, but she walked me to the door. Our hands brushed once more, lingering a fraction longer than necessary, and our eyes met with an unspoken understanding. She wasn't just a woman I admired from afar anymore. She was becoming someone who mattered in a way that frightened and exhilarated me at the same time. I left that evening feeling taller, steadier, changed in a way I could not yet articulate. She had seen me, truly seen me, and in letting me glimpse her heart, she had unlocked something I didn't know existed inside myself. After the quiet intimacy of our previous meetings, reality came rushing back with all its sharp edges. It started subtly at first. A raised eyebrow from a coworker, a lingering glance from a friend, the faint murmur of gossip carried on conversations I wasn't meant to hear. The age difference between us, once an abstract number in my mind, suddenly became a weight pressing on every interaction. I noticed it in her eyes before I even realized it myself. A flicker of caution, a brief tightening of her lips, a hesitation in her smile. She tried to shrug it off, as she always did, maintaining the calm, poised demeanor that made her so compelling. But I could see the walls creeping back into her posture, the way her hands folded over themselves, the slight tension in her shoulders when we were around other people. It pained me to witness it, knowing that the world's judgment was attempting to intrude on the delicate connection we were building. She was strong, capable, confident. Yet even she wasn't immune to the pressure of society's whispers. I felt it too. Walking beside her, sharing quiet glances over coffee tables or along city streets, I could feel the stares, sense the silent commentary. I wanted to shield her from it, to make her feel safe, but I also knew I had no control over the world outside our little bubble. The tension hung in the air, invisible but palpable, coloring every word, every pause, every fleeting touch. And yet, when it was just the two of us, the warmth returned. One evening, we found ourselves alone again, perhaps on a quiet balcony overlooking the city lights. The world was far away, irrelevant in that moment. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine with a mixture of longing and fear. "I hate feeling watched," she admitted softly, almost too quietly for anyone else to hear. "But I hate pushing you away even more." Her honesty hit me like a wave. I took a step closer, careful not to crowd her, and gently took her hand in mine. The warmth of her skin, the firmness beneath my fingers, grounded me. "I'm not here to make you feel small," I said quietly. "I'm here because I want to be." The words felt raw, honest, and entirely inadequate to express the intensity of what I felt. She let out a soft breath, a mixture of relief and lingering tension, and for a moment, the city and its judgments didn't exist. Our hands remained entwined, small, meaningful gestures of connection that spoke louder than any conversation could. She leaned slightly against me, a quiet acknowledgement of trust, and I felt a strange mix of pride and tenderness. I wanted to protect her from everything, the judgment, the whispers, even the doubts she carried within herself. Even as the outside world pressed against us, our private moments became sanctuaries. Every touch, every look, every brush of hands was a silent rebellion against the expectation that we should act appropriately for our ages. In her presence, I realized that love, real, messy, human love, wasn't about societal approval. It was about trust, about showing up, about letting someone see you fully and choosing to stay. And in those stolen, quiet moments we stayed, together, quietly defiant, and more aware of what we meant to each other than ever before. The night it happened wasn't planned. Life has a way of forcing truth into the quietest moments, when we least expect it. Perhaps it was a sudden storm, rain hammering against the windows, or maybe a blackout that left her apartment bathed only in the soft glow of candlelight. Either way, the world outside disappeared, leaving only us in a space that felt suspended between time and reality. She was there, standing in the dim light, vulnerable in a way she had never allowed anyone to see. The confident poise that usually surrounded her seemed to melt, revealing the layers she had carefully built over the years: exhaustion, fear, the weight of responsibilities, and a quiet loneliness she rarely admitted. Her eyes were wide, reflecting both apprehension and something else, something tender that she had fought to conceal. I noticed every detail, the way her fingers trembled as she tried to steady a teacup, the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders, the way she avoided looking directly at me as if afraid I might see too much. It was a side of her no one else had ever seen, and it demanded a response that went beyond words. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that she didn't have to carry everything alone, but I also feared overstepping, of shattering the delicate trust she had given me. Then, slowly, almost instinctively, she stepped closer. I reached out, gently placing my hand on her arm to steady her, to offer a quiet anchor. The warmth of her skin against mine sent a thrill through me, a mixture of tenderness, care, and something deeper I wasn't ready to name. For a long moment, we simply stood there, our breathing steadying one another, the silence filled with unspoken words and emotions too intense for speech. Finally, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm outside, "I'm scared of needing someone again, scared of hurting you." Her words were a confession, a crack in the armor she had so carefully maintained. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to match hers, steady and calm. "You don't have to be anything but yourself with me," I said. "I'm not here to take from you. I'm here because I choose to stay." The weight of her gaze pressed into me, searching, questioning, and in that moment, I felt her heart. I felt the vulnerability she had tried so hard to protect, and I understood the depth of her fear. Not of love, not of affection, but of trusting someone completely after so many years of guarding herself. Our foreheads met in a gentle, deliberate touch, close enough that every breath mingled. The storm outside became inconsequential. In that quiet, suspended moment, there was no judgment, no fear, only two people daring to let each other in, to see and be seen without reservation. Her hand lingered on mine, anchoring us together, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of her trust. That night, everything changed. I had glimpsed her heart, fragile, guarded, and yet radiant, and I knew that whatever came next, nothing could be the same. Loving her was no longer a fleeting idea or a subtle admiration. It was a responsibility, a choice, and a privilege. And in seeing her so completely, I began to understand just how much she had already changed me. By now, the rhythm of our connection had changed. It wasn't the dizzying infatuation of the first encounters anymore, nor was it the raw vulnerability of that stormy night. It had settled into something quieter, deeper, a steady warmth that lingered in every glance, every touch, every shared moment. Loving her was no longer just an emotional thrill. It had become a mirror, reflecting the man I was and the man I wanted to become. I noticed how much I had grown since meeting her. I listened more carefully, spoke more deliberately, and acted with thoughtfulness I hadn't possessed before. She had a way of making me want to rise to the occasion, not for her, but because being around her demanded honesty, patience, and presence. It wasn't about proving myself. It was about living up to the standard of care she showed in everything she did. Every gesture of hers, a thoughtful word, a small act of kindness, a steadying hand when things went wrong, reminded me that life was richer when lived attentively. One afternoon, we were together in her living room again, this time organizing some old photographs she had dug out from a drawer. We laughed over old memories, marveled at the ways time had changed people we once knew, and teased each other gently over shared stories. At one point, as I handed her a particularly worn photograph, her fingers brushed mine. The contact was brief, but it carried the weight of familiarity, trust, and something quietly affectionate. She gave me a small smile, that subtle curve of her lips that spoke more than words ever could, and I felt an ache in my chest, a mixture of tenderness, gratitude, and a quiet, unwavering love. She noticed the changes in me too. One evening, as we were sitting on her balcony, the city lights casting a warm glow around us, she reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from my forehead. Her hand lingered for a heartbeat, cupping my cheek with careful tenderness. "You've grown," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "Not in age, but in ways that matter." I met her gaze, feeling the sincerity behind her words, and realized that loving her had pushed me to confront my own flaws, my own immaturity. I wanted to be steady for her, to support her, to meet her as a partner rather than a boy still learning how to navigate the world. It was in these quiet, seemingly mundane moments that our connection deepened. The world outside, with its judgments, its whispers, its assumptions, seemed to fall away whenever we were together. Every smile, every touch, every shared silence became a testament to our bond. I had become more patient, more grounded, more aware of my own emotions, and I knew it was because she had demanded, silently, gently, that I rise to the level of care and understanding she deserved. That evening, as we watched the city shimmer below us, our hands intertwined, I realized that loving her wasn't just about longing or desire. It was about growth, about becoming a better version of myself simply by choosing to be present with her. And in that quiet, transformative understanding, I felt the profound weight and beauty of what we had. A connection that reshaped me, strengthened me, and anchored me in ways I could never have imagined before meeting her. After everything, the initial spark, the stolen moments of laughter, the quiet confessions, the storms both literal and emotional, we finally reached a place of clarity. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. There was no thunderclap, no cinematic declaration. It was simply a quiet, profound recognition that we belonged together, that the hesitations and fears we had carried were now outweighed by trust, understanding, and love. We met at the café where it all began, the place that had once seemed ordinary but had quietly witnessed the beginnings of our story. She was there before me, standing by the window, bathed in the soft morning light. I could see the faint smile playing at the corners of her lips, the same gentle curve that had captivated me from the start. My heart tightened at the sight of her, familiar, yet now carrying the depth of all the moments we had shared since that first encounter. As I approached, our eyes met, and in that gaze, all the unsaid words passed between us. She didn't need to speak them. I understood without effort. We had been through fear, doubt, and uncertainty together, and we had emerged stronger. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and rested her hand on my chest, letting me feel the steady beat beneath her palm. The warmth of her touch grounded me, reminding me that this was real, tangible, and mutual. I took her hand in mine, holding it firmly yet gently, and I felt the weight of every choice, every moment that had led us here. "You've changed me," I said softly, meeting her gaze with all the sincerity I could muster. "You've made me grow, made me want to be better, stronger, more present, and I don't want to imagine my life without you in it." She leaned closer, her forehead resting against mine, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her eyes, no fear lurking beneath the surface. "You make me feel alive again," she whispered, "and you've reminded me that it's okay to let someone in, to trust, to care, fully." Her words were tender, and yet they carried the strength and certainty of someone who had made a choice not lightly, but with full awareness. For a long moment, we simply stood there, breathing together, hands intertwined, foreheads pressed in quiet intimacy. Around us, the café buzzed with life, but it was irrelevant. In that space, there was only us, two people who had dared to care despite the world's expectations, who had nurtured trust, affection, and understanding into something steady and enduring. Then, slowly, naturally, we pulled each other into a hug. It wasn't rushed or hesitant. It was warm, grounding, and intimate without being overwhelming. Her head rested on my shoulder, and I felt her relax completely, as if letting go of every lingering doubt. I held her, careful and deliberate, knowing that this embrace was more than just physical comfort. It was a promise, a commitment, and a culmination of every moment we had shared. As we pulled back, our eyes met once more, and we smiled, a shared, quiet acknowledgement of the journey we had taken. Loving her had demanded patience, maturity, and courage, and in loving her, I had grown beyond what I ever imagined. That morning, in the soft light of the café, we chose each other fully, confidently, and without hesitation. And in that choice, we found a love that was steady, enduring, and utterly transformative.